Sorry, I was a little late on the trigger there. Good morning. It's good to be with you all. We are starting a new series this morning we're calling Fascinating Stories of Forgotten Lives. And I just thought this would be a fun opportunity where we could explore our Old Testament with a little different twist, maybe, a little different viewpoint, so to speak. And so I have chosen 10 people from the New Testament that are probably not on the top of your list of your favorite Bible characters. Okay, and so that's what we're going to be doing the next 10 weeks or 11 weeks, I guess, because we'll have one other week in there. But I just hope this is an enjoyable time where, again, we can learn our Old Testament, but we can also take away some really important lessons about ourselves and our lives as we see truth reflected in these various lives in the Old Testament. So today we're going to be in Numbers 13, looking at the man named Caleb. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to stand alone on a conviction? Have you been in one of those situations where the whole crowd, so to speak, whatever group you were a part of, was moving in one direction, and you weren't okay with that? And so you were forced with the decision, am I going to stand for what I believe or not? And this isn't a question about opinion. You know, my opinion was this and their opinion was that, and we just disagreed. This is a question about conviction, of truth, of ethics, of morals, of God's will, God's desire for our lives. Have you ever been in one of those situations where the whole kind of movement was away from God and you had to make the decision to stay on conviction or not? Thought about, like, in school, maybe, whatever age, this comes with all different ages, right? Friends where maybe somebody's getting bullied, or they're planning to do something to someone, to get back at that person, to whatever it may be. And you have to decide, are you going to go along with the group or not? I think about it, work, or maybe the boss has been pushing to go a direction that you think is unethical or immoral, and you have to decide, are you going to go along with this, or are you going to make a sacrifice with your job and stand up to this? We could say any number of different situations, right? But it's an interesting situation, a very tough situation. I don't know how many of us have feel like we've been in that situation, but that's the situation we're going to find today. We're going to find a man, Caleb, who has a decision about whether he's going to stand on conviction or go with the crowd against what he knows is right. And so I told you chapter 13, that's where we're going to start, Numbers 13. This we have to set up to kind of know where we're at here so we know where it fits in the story. The Hebrew people have been in Egypt for 400 years. They've been enslaved. It started as a really good situation, if you remember, right? Joseph helped kind of lead them down there through some really unique circumstances, and they've been there for 400 years, and the situation has gone from good to very bad, and now they're being enslaved and oppressed, and the work is getting harder and harder. God has raised up a man named Moses. He has asked this man to go and deal with Pharaoh. And the more Moses goes on God's behalf to Pharaoh, the worse things get, because Pharaoh won't listen and his heart keeps hardening. And so the plagues keep mounting, but the difficulties keep mounting as well. But finally, the Passover plague happens, the one that we'll celebrate here in a little bit with communion, how that points back to those. God provides provision for the people, the Hebrew people, and eventually Pharaoh lets them go and sends them out, and Moses leads them out into the wilderness, through the Red Sea, and into the wilderness. For about a year, they have now been gone out of Egypt. They've spent most of that time at Mount Sinai, a place where God met with them. He gave them the law. They remember he met Moses on the mountain in fire and clouds, and they had earthquakes. And remember, we have the whole golden calf thing that happens. So they've been here really a long time. And finally, God says, okay, it's time to move. It's time to go from here to this promised land. This land that they had been promised to Abraham centuries before, and Abraham had gone there obediently, and then through the series of circumstances, then they had left, remember, to go to Egypt, where we caught up with our story today. So the people have been here before, not these people, but their people group have been here before, and now God says it's time, let's go back. And so if you picture in your head a map from Egypt, they've come across, and now they're going to come north, from south to north, and so they're going to find themselves in the desert of Paran, or I have in my notes here the desert of Paran. Awesome, Jeff. Good job. And so they are at a place called Kadesh Barnea. Yes, I know. I was nervous about that all week, and there it is. I thought I found them all. A place called Kadesh Barnea, okay? A place where they were on the southern edge, where they knew they were now entering into this promised land and into a place where other people lived. It was other people's territory. And so that's where we're going to pick up the story here in chapter 13, verse 1. The Lord spoke to Moses. He said, "Send out men to investigate the land of Canaan," that's the promised land, "which I am giving to the Israelites. You are to send one man from each ancestral tribe, each one a leader among them." So Moses sent them from the wilderness of Paran at the command of the Lord. All of them were leaders of the Israelites. Okay, so he's sending them in to investigate the land. We're going to get more details here in a second about what that means. But I want you to notice a couple things about what is said here. In verse 2, he says, "Go to investigate the land which I am giving to you." Okay, God has made this promise before, and he went through on the promise. He showed himself good on the promise before. He's saying it again. We're going to go into this place, and I'm going to give you this land. Okay, they should be proceeding with great confidence, because God has said what the outcome is going to be. I'm going to give you this land. He hasn't said it's going to be easy. He hasn't said it's going to be pleasant, but he said what the result is. I am going to be giving you this land. So they should be proceeding with this kind of confidence. And notice it says, send 12, one from each tribe, the leaders of the tribes, each tribe. So there were 12 tribes. He's saying, pick one leader from each tribe, and they will be the spies that go in. These are the ones that all the people are to be following, right? Whether in their individual tribe and now collectively together, these are the leaders of the people that we're sending in to be spies, to investigate this land. So there's an interesting thing we need to just kind of stop and tell ourselves, or ask ourselves. Do we trust God? Do we trust him and his promises? In this case, he's told them what the outcome is going to be. He said, go, I'm going to give this to you. I'm simply asking you to go investigate it, because this is going to be war, right? They're going to have to go in and take this land from the people who are there. So it's not like they're just going to stroll in and things are going to be easy. Like, this is going to be tough, but he has said what the outcome is. Do they trust him? That's the root of this situation. And so the same with us. Do we trust him? Now, God may not speak promises as clearly to you as he has to them, but he has spoken promises to us. He has given truth to us. He has given us precepts. He's given us commands. He's given us these things that we know are true, that we should be doing in our lives, that we should be following, that we should be obeying, that we should be living our lives by. And in many times, there's situations where we get to ask ourselves, do I want to compromise what I believe to be true or not? And what the question underneath that is do I believe that what God has promised, what God has said, what God has instructed is true or not? Do I trust him enough to obey him in this situation when it may not be pleasant or easy to do? And that's the question that they are confronted with, whether they know it or not. He has said, I'm giving you this land, go investigate it. And so the question will be, how are they going to respond? And so we go to this next paragraph, verses 4 through 16, and this is a list of the 12 guys that are sent in. I want you to notice there in verse 6, we have Caleb. He's our focus today, but there's 12 guys here. Now, I find this interesting, and this is a little bit of like a cultural rabbit trail that I found myself on this week, and I don't know that I have an answer, but I think this is interesting, that God took the time to list all 12 of them. He didn't have to. God could have easily just said, I sent in 12. And later, as we get down the rest of the story, we're going to find out, 10 are one way and 10 or 2 go the other way. And he could just list the 2 for us and say, yeah, these 10 messed up and these 2 were faithful. He could have done that, but instead he takes the time to list all 12 and the tribes that they belong to and their fathers, their family lineage as well. And I just find this interesting. My personal belief is that this is occurring and is written to, in terms of Old Testament, into a shame and honor culture. I think there's some cultural things embedded here that God is doing that we don't understand because we don't live in a shame and honor culture. We don't have the same reactions when somebody around us fails or succeeds, or somebody's grandparents did, and we're like, oh, that's the son of, or the child, the grandson, or the whatever of this person. And like we respect them, like maybe we know them, but we don't have the same amount of respect or honor or shame depending on what that relationship was, what that reputation is. And just my gut feeling is that these 12 were listed for a reason. They were listed for accountability's sake. And obviously, a little bit of a spoiler, for the 2 that make a good decision, that's an honorable thing, right? Their families forever can say, I am one of Caleb or Joshua's descendants. And of the other 10, they're like, I'm from one of their tribes, one of their families. That's what I think is happening. I think there's a cultural layer here that we don't quite understand. But we get to verse 17, and we have Moses' instructions to them. So it says, when Moses sent them to investigate the land of Canaan, he told them, go up through the Negev. That's a very deserty, rugged region on the southern edge. Go up through the Negev, up into the hill country, and see what the land is like, and whether the people who live in it are strong or weak, few or many, and whether the land they live in is good or bad, and whether the cities are inhabited or the cities that they inhabit are like camps or fortified cities, and whether the land is rich or poor, and whether or not there are forests in it. And be brave and bring back some of the fruit of the land. Now it was the time of the year for the first ripe grapes. That's July, by the way. And so he's given them these instructions. Now remember, they're preparing for war. So this investigation is very legitimate, right? You want to know what it is you're walking into in battle. Totally makes sense. We should expect this. This is a wise thing. God has obviously told them to do that. So off they go. They head into the land. Remember, they've been gone 400 years, so there's plenty of time for other people groups to come and inhabit the land, to come and live there. That so far as those people are concerned, it's their land, not theirs, right? Because it's been a long time since the Hebrew people have been there. And so on one hand, what they are doing is very sensible. It's what God has commanded. On the other hand, we have to recognize something. If we trust his promise true, that he will give them the land, then whatever it is they discover there doesn't matter. Because God's going to be faithful. It'll shade like what this is going to look like. It'll prepare them to know how to go into the situation. But if they truly are trusting him and he has said, I'm going to give this to you, it doesn't matter. They can go forward with confidence. This investigation is simply information gathering. It's not helping us make a decision whether we're going to do this or not. And that's where they get into trouble. So, verse 21, the spies went up. They investigated the land from the wilderness of Zin to Rehob, at Lebo Hamath. I'm terrible at these, sorry. When they went up through the Negev, they came to Hebron, where Ahiman, Sheshaiah, and Talmaiah, the descendants of Anak, were living. Now Hebron had been built 7 years before Zon in Egypt, so that's a reference back to where they had been living as a kind of timeline comparison. When they came to the valley of Eshcol, they cut down from there a branch with one cluster of grapes, and they carried it off on a staff between 2 men, as well as some of the pomegranates and figs. That place was called the Eshcol Valley because of the cluster of grapes that the Israelites cut from there. And they returned from investigating the land after 40 days. This all seems okay, right? We haven't read anything here that gives us alarm. This is sort of the narrator's report, right? This is the third hand. Hey, here is what happened, just to let you know. This is what they experienced. I love this description here of the cluster of grapes. I'm picturing the old cartoons as a kid, where, Elmer Fudd went hunting and they had a deer and it was on the stick between them, right? And you see the guys and the deer's bouncing along. I see that except with this big thing of grapes. And I'm thinking, how big was this cluster of grapes to have two guys carrying it on a stick? Like, obviously, the land seems to be a very good land. There's nothing in the narrator's report here that alarms us to anything. And so we continue. And the next paragraph is the actual spies reports, the guys who went in to investigate. This is their version of the report. They came back to Moses and Aaron and to the whole community of the Israelites in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. They reported to the whole community and showed the fruit of the land. They told Moses, "We went to the land where you sent us. It indeed is flowing with milk and honey, and this is its fruit." So far, so good, huh? I love this description, flowing with milk and honey. It's like there's rivers of milk flowing and rivers of honey. Right? We know that's not real, right? But it's a figure of speech. To the abundance, that it's a plentiful land. It's a very good land. There's crops just everywhere, overflowing. Verse 38, but, it's a contrast word. So that means things are changing. The whole story is about to change. The inhabitants are strong, and the cities are fortified and very large. Moreover, we saw the descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites live in the land of the Negev, the Hittites, the Jebusites, the Amorites live in the hill country, and the Canaanites live by the sea and along the banks of the Jordan. Now, for you and I, this doesn't sound that bad, right? I mean, there were people there. That's what we expect, right? Except later, we're going to see this allusion here again in a little bit. But the descendants of Anak, these other tribes he mentioned, they were known as very large people. I hate to use the word giants because I don't want us to get the wrong impression, but big people. So to say their cities were large and well fortified and the people are very large, strong, militaristic people, that's not good news. And so here they are reporting the 10. And we don't get directly the response of the people, but we do get it in verse 30. Because Caleb had to silence the people before Moses, saying, "Let's go up and occupy it, for we are well able to conquer it." So evidently, the people were grumbling that at this report of the descendants of Anak and fortified cities, they're like, "Oh, we can't do this. I don't think we should do this. That's a bad idea. We're not going to do this, are we? He's not going to make us, right?" Grumbling, murmuring. And so Caleb, he steps up and he's like, no. We can do this. We should go do this. We are well capable of doing this. This is one of the guys that saw firsthand. He saw, witnessed everything all the others were saying. He just sees it different. Because he's seen through this trust of God. And they're just seeing the problems. And so he has to silence the crowd. But 31, but the men who had gone up with him said, "We're not able to go up against these people because they are stronger than we are." Then they presented the Israelites with a discouraging report. And listen to this report. This is discouraging. That the land they had investigated, saying, "The land that we passed through to investigate is a land that devours its inhabitants." That's a lot different than milk and honey. "All the people we saw there are of great stature. We even saw the Nephilim there. The descendants of Anak came from the Nephilim." So the Nephilim were giants. Anak descendants were giants. All these others, they're all giants. "And we seemed like grasshoppers, both to ourselves and to them." What a picture, huh? I mean, you picture a grasshopper, right? Little guy down there. They were so big that we thought even each other were grasshoppers. It's kind of a scary report, isn't it? And think about it. If you're someone in this crowd and you're going to send your relative or you yourself go off to war, the last thing you want to do is to be a grasshopper going up against giants in a land that devours its inhabitants. This is not a good report, is it? Suddenly, everything's switched. The narrator's report and the spies' reports are two very different reports. And so in 14 verse 1, all the community raised a loud cry, and the people wept that night. And all the Israelites murmured against Moses and Aaron, and the whole congregation said to them, "If only we had died in the land of Egypt, or if only we had perished in the wilderness. Why has the Lord brought us into this land only to be killed by the sword, that our wives and our children should become plunder? Wouldn't it be better if we just returned to Egypt?" And so they said to one another, "Let's appoint a leader and return to Egypt." These people are beside themselves. And we know the whole story, or at least many of us, right? And so we're like, "Oh, come on, people." But think about it. If you're in their shoes and you believe this report to be true, you'd be discouraged too, wouldn't you? You'd be scared of what's happening. You wouldn't want to go into battle yourself or anyone you love. You'd be fearful for the results. And so they spent all night weeping and grieving. I can imagine that they feel stuck or abandoned by God. That they actually feel like it'd be better to go back. Like, "God, why did you bring us here? It'd be better if we went back." Can you imagine what they're actually saying, how they would have been treated if they would have gone back? Like that's what they're telling themselves as they murmured and gossiped and complained and rebelled against the leaders. Essentially, having a vote of no confidence. When they said, we want to elect a new leader, we're essentially saying, we don't want to follow you anymore. What a position. So these 10 who have given the bad report have caused outright mutiny, have caused an uprising. These 10 and how they went in and experienced this situation has been radically different than Caleb. And as we're going to find out, also Joshua. It's completely different in how they saw this situation. And so their report was filtered through not the lens of trusting God and who he is and his promises and his trustworthiness and all these things. It's filtered through their fears. It's filtered through their own self-centeredness. They have this illusion that life should be roses and sunshine, and that it all should just be easy. And the fact that this looks difficult, even though God has promised it to us, I don't want to do it because I'd rather be in a lazy boy, so to speak, right? And so they're rebelling. And in their rebellion, these 10, they're causing the rebellion of all the people. Huge influence as they're causing the whole people group to come up against Moses and Aaron and Caleb and Joshua. The people are saying, "No, thank you, God. We don't want to go in there. If this is what it's going to cost, we don't want to do this. It's not worth this to be obedient." So verse 5, Moses and Aaron fell down with their faces to the ground before the whole assembled community of the Israelites. And Joshua, the son of Nun, and Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, I think, 2 of those who had investigated the land, they tore their garments. That's a sign of grief, of agony, of the, I'm grieving this so much, I'm tearing my clothes. Another place in Scripture, you hear of them taking dirt and throwing dirt on their heads, and they're saying, I'm grieving this so much, I just wish I was dead. Go ahead and bury me now. Like that's the level of their grief. And they said to the whole community of the Israelites, the land we passed through to investigate is an exceedingly good land. If the Lord delights in us, then he will bring us into this land and give it to us, a land that is flowing with milk and honey. Only do not rebel against the Lord. Do not fear the people of the land, for they are bread for us. Their protection has turned aside from them, but the Lord is with us. Do not fear them. These leaders are begging the people to follow God. They're begging the people, don't you see God is faithful? Don't you remember his promises? Think back. Don't you remember who he is? What he has done for us thus far. You think about just the last year of their lives. Coming out of Egypt, the Passover, the plagues, the going through the Red Sea, the giving of the law on the mountain, all these signs, all these things that God had done to show his faithfulness, to show his presence, to show his character, who he was, and that they were his chosen people. And then he had said, I will give you this land. And the leaders are begging them, be faithful, trust him, follow him. And it's like this tug of war of faithfulness has broke out. In verse 10, however, the whole community threatened to stone them. These leaders, these four men, Caleb included, has a lot at risk here. I mean, they're trying to stone them to death. I myself, I've never been put in a situation where standing for my convictions may actually cost me my life. What a difficult place to be. But the glory of the Lord appeared to all the Israelites at the tent of meeting. And then if we keep reading, he has come to give them the consequence of their disobedience. Which is ironic because he gives them exactly what they want. They say, we don't want to go in. He says, okay, you won't. Instead, you'll wander in the desert for 40 years. A whole generation. We know, as we look forward in the story, that of all of these people, all of these millions of Israelites that are right here in front of them, only 2 will enter the land. Caleb and Joshua. We know that only 2, the 2 faithful ones, the 2 that trusted him, will get to go in. This little passage here, this scene is an example that the majority is not always right. And that we have to be discerning people. We have to be people grounded in truth, not our opinions, but in truth. So that as the crowd starts to move one direction or another, we know where to stand. So we don't get sucked with them. That we don't compromise with them. We don't insult God as they are. In this situation, there were a lot of people moving away from the promised land. And if it was a popularity vote, we're all going against God. But Caleb and Joshua said, no, we're standing with God. This reminds me of the New Testament and the narrow road and the wide road, and the narrow gate and the wide gate. If we're going to be faithful, we have to be prepared for the narrow road and the narrow gate. And to know that as easy as that sounds, oh, I'll choose the narrow one because I know it's right. when the crowd is trying to suck us down the wide one, we might have to fight through the crowd to get to the narrow one, to make sure that we stand on our convictions. This is a warning to us, I think, in at least two different ways. First is how we influence others. We need to be careful with our words. We need to be careful with our opinions. Many times, we get sucked into the gossip mill, into the back rooms, the coffee shops, the whatever conversations that are just full of our opinions and very little fact. And it's easy for us to have this much information and this much opinion, and we lead other people down the wrong path. The 10 were probably correct in their description. I'm sure the descendants of Anak were large people. I'm sure the cities were large and fortified. But where they were wrong was that they couldn't do it. Their opinion, their assessment, the lens that they viewed this through was the wrong lens, even though the facts were right. We have to be careful that we do not jump to conclusions, that we don't create judgments, that we don't create our opinions based on kind of facts, not on what God has said. These 10 carelessly place themselves in the authority seat of God, saying, even though God has told us what is going to happen, we don't believe him. We know better than he does. And this isn't for us. This isn't possible. These 10 men were foolish with their words. They did not seek God before they spoke. And the result was punishment for millions of people for 40 years. We must be careful with our words. We must be wise. We must be discerning. On the other side, we have to ask ourselves how we are influenced by others. When we are part of the crowd, not one of the leaders, how are we influenced? And this is a tricky balance because we have to balance being teachable, the idea that maybe I don't know everything and maybe I do have a wrong opinion. Maybe I need to learn something in this situation, but also knowing what my convictions are and where do these things clash and what is compromisable and what is not. What is negotiable and what is not. What is my opinion and what is fact. What is standard and what isn't. And so, when we participate in the gossip, when we participate in this kind of half-cooked information passing, we're getting sucked into it. We're allowing ourselves to be influenced down these wrong roads. Maybe not, but we don't know. But we allow ourselves to be influenced in these ways. We end up in places we never wanted to be, with opinions we never should have had. There are many things that God asks us to do that will induce fear. Some of them are really simple. Like, hey, go love your neighbor. I don't like my neighbor. My neighbor's not a nice person. Okay, well, go love them. It's relatively small, but makes you really uncomfortable, doesn't it? Much less go to war. Go take a land that I promised. Risk your life for standing on this truth. God is going to ask us to do all kinds of things that are uncomfortable. And that doesn't make them any less true. It doesn't mean we have any more room to negotiate the terms of the deal. If it's true, if he has asked us to do it, do we trust him? Do we trust him to move forward into that situation that is scary, that's hard, that's difficult, that's messy, that may actually damage us in some way, our reputation, whatever it may be? These people in this passage, they're showing a clear desire to be independent from God. They would rather be their own people than God's people. And at the root of this is their trust of God. The 10 and the people have said, we don't trust God. We don't trust our leaders. We only trust ourselves. whereas the other 4 have said, we trust you, God. This is going to be difficult. It's going to be tough, but we trust you. There's another aspect of this that I think is interesting. I want us to think about it from the aspect of leadership, how we lead and how we follow, because all of us are on both positions. All of us are in places where we lead, and all of us are in places where we follow. Think about what Moses and Aaron and Joshua and Caleb are going through in this moment. The grief in their heart as the people are voting no confidence and saying, we're not going to follow. And saying, we're going to have this punishment now. And how now these 4 have to go along too for the 40 years. They're like, hey, God, I was faithful. And God's like, sorry. The people weren't. The people knew these are our leaders. And yet they said, no, thank you. We don't want to submit to leaders. We want to lead ourselves. Even though God had given numerous examples over the last year of his hand being on Moses and Aaron, they said, no, thank you. We want to lead ourselves. And so for me, this made me ask myself, how do I follow and how do I lead? Because in the situations where I'm in leadership, I need to ask myself, am I leading by following God? Or am I leading as the 10 did, doing it my own way? And in the situations where I'm following, I ask myself, do I trust these people? Am I willing to submit to them? Do I believe God has them in this position for a reason? Both are difficult. Both can be positions that are really hard. I can't imagine how difficult it was for these 4. The root of this is our trust of God. And how do we discern God's will? How do we understand what is true and what is compromisable? What we must stand firm on and not absolutely compromise, and those that we can talk about, our opinions, our perspectives. And then how do we have the courage, once we know that, to take a stand or to be teachable? How do we do this knowing that it may be costly? Caleb did what was right, and he's going to be in the desert for 40 years. We found out later, it's 45 years exactly from when this happens to when he enters into the kingdom. An entire nation has been led astray by those who didn't trust God. So my prayer for us is that we're faithful people who trust him, people who go and diligently seek him. And whether it appears to be hard or easy or comfortable or not, we would rather be faithful and stand on truth than not. So would you pray with me, please? Father, standing for you is growing harder and harder. The world has done a good job of drifting its way away from you. And if we are going to be your hands and feet in the world, if we're going to be salt and light, if we're going to be examples for our world to follow, that's going to require us to stand for truth. It's going to require us to be diligent in seeking you so that we know what is true and what isn't. It's going to require us to be very discerning, very wise, very prayerful people. And Father, when those moments come, I pray that we are people of courage, that we're people who want to be faithful more than we want to fit in. People who are willing to sacrifice, to be faithful to you. And so, Father, I'm not sure what's happening in all of our lives right now. There may be any number of situations brewing right here at this moment where people are at this crossroads, this decision of what to do. I pray that you give them wisdom and discernment. Give them clarity. I pray that as a church, we would be people who are bold, who are faithful, and who are following you, even when it's a bit risky. Father, we know that you are faithful. You've proven that over and over again. So when we're standing at that precipice, remind us of it. Father, I ask this in Jesus' name.